This is Joe narrating a PowerPoint in Social Studies. It's lesson 3 in the economics unit, talking about the economy and the U.S. government. It's on page 462 in Kaplan. In the last lesson we talked about the laissez-faire capitalism, or the free market system in the United States, but the government does step in to fill in the gaps to help protect its citizens. And we'll talk about how that is done. First, some definitions. The United States government has a budget just like we all do. It has revenue coming in the form of taxes. It has expenses going out in the form of pay to government workers, support for our military, government programs like Medicare and Medicaid. It has a surplus if the money coming in or the revenue is more than the expenses, and it has a deficit if the revenue coming in is less than its expenses. So we all do our own personal budget in our households, so we're familiar with this idea. If you look at a graph of the United States national debt by year, on the x-axis you have the years since 1967 through 2009, and on the y-axis on the left you have the budget surplus or deficit in millions of dollars. So, for example, when you see in red there a million, that is really a million or $1 trillion. So we were doing pretty good. If you look at the red line, that's a zero balance, meaning our revenues and expenses are the same, until about 2008 or so, when we incurred a very large deficit. Right in 2009, the deficit went down as low as $1.4 trillion. Currently, in 2016, it's up around 10 times that amount, or $14 trillion. Sometimes it's useful to compare our national debt to our total economy. In this graph, on the x-axis, you have the years from 1790 to projected to 2050. In the part in red there is basically a projection or a prediction about the future. And on the y-axis on the left, you have the percent of the economy that the national debt makes up. So you can see, like in 1840 or so, we had no national debt. In World War II and other wars, the national debt went up because of the need for supporting the war monetarily. Currently, or at least in 2010, the national debt was about 75% of our GDP. So that means the amount we owe is about the same as 75% of all the goods and services we produce in 1 year. Large numbers like trillions are very hard to comprehend for most of us. So here's another graph with years on the x-axis and a number of dollars on the y-axis on the left. This has three different items compared. For example, the blue line is the federal debt per each person or per capita in the United States. The red line is the state and local debt per capita, and the green line is the household debt per capita. So you can see that the federal debt is the fastest growing. That means how much each of us would owe if the government had to pay back the people it owes money to. So that is about $50,000 per person. So that's you, your spouse if you have one, and all your kids owe $50,000 apiece. The state and local debt, that would be the state of Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, for example, we owe about $10,000 apiece. And looking at the average household debt items, for example, your mortgage, your car payments, or your credit card balances, the average in the United States in 2010 was about $42,000. So on average, if we had to repay the debt, which we don't have to right now, we would all owe about $100,000 if you combine these three types of debt. So here's some government agencies that help smooth out the economy, at least in theory. The Federal Reserve is a name for the Central Bank of the United States. This bank is a system that consists of a board of governors based in Washington, D.C., and then 12 regional banks. The goal of the Federal Reserve is to maximize employment, that is considered a good for society, to stabilize the prices, to keep inflation from going up too much and the dollar value going down, and moderate long-term interest rates. So businesses like to know what the interest rates will be in the future so that they can have some idea how much to spend currently. So here's the regions that are under the control of each regional branch of the Federal Reserve. There is a Federal Reserve building in Philadelphia. This is at 6th Street near Arch, and you can take a tour of this Federal Reserve building. So what is currency? Currency is another name for money. It includes paper bills and coins. Back in the time right after the Revolutionary War, each state might print out its own money. To have a united country, it was decided that there should be one currency for all the states, as currently exists. This picture is a classic picture of a scene from the Great Depression, which occurred in 1929, and it affected most countries in the world. There was massive unemployment, very little income for people. People would line up for jobs or line up for a free cup of coffee and a donut. Unemployment reached 40%. During this time in the Great Depression, people were worried about what would happen to their money that was in the bank, so of course many people went to the banks to withdraw their money. The problem with this is that the banks don't keep everyone's money in a lockbox somewhere. For example, this is a chart showing how much of the money that people put in the bank, how much the bank has to keep as a percentage. For example, if the bank has very few deposits, less than $14.5 million, they don't have to keep any money in their vaults. A larger bank that has between 14.5 million up to 103.6 million, they only have to keep 3% of the money deposited in their vaults for people coming and going and wanting to cash out their bank accounts. And if the bank is larger and has over 103.6 million in reserves, it has to keep just 10% of the cash that is deposited by the depositors on hand. So what's to prevent another run on the bank? In 1933, the federal government instituted the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. This was done to reassure people so there would not be a run on the bank. For example, no matter what happens to the economy, currently a husband and wife, their joint bank account is insured by the government for $500,000. So this is to restore confidence in the banking system, so when there is a downturn in the economy, people won't think about running to the bank and cashing out their bank accounts. Another federal organization is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA. As the title suggests, it tries to keep workers safe and healthy. One of the things it did was get rid of child labor. So prior to these regulations by the government, kids would often miss out on opportunities in school because they had to work. Sometimes they had to work at quite dangerous jobs. It also makes sure that workers are as safe as possible. For example, you'll see these signs at construction sites. If an employee or a construction worker is caught without a hard hat, the owner of the business can get a fine by OSHA, and that is to encourage the workers to wear their hard hats and encourage business owners to make sure that their workers are as safe as possible. So OSHA is a federal agency. It protects workers' safety and it protects the interests of workers, as we talked about with child labor laws. The FDA is another federal organization. It's the Food and Drug Administration. It attempts to assure that food is safe, that drugs are safe and effective, and that cosmetics and drugs labeled properly, meaning that all ingredients are listed. So some drugs do not require a doctor's prescription, but they still have to be considered safe. For example, you'll see advertisements on many drugs that don't require a prescription. Sometimes they're creams or pills or vitamins. They are required to list all their ingredients, and they can't make overreaching health claims, meaning they can't promise to cure things unless there's scientific evidence showing that they do cure. And this government agency, the Federal Trade Commission, makes sure that product claims are accurate, both in advertisements, for example, on TV or magazines, and on the labels themselves. So products can't claim to cure cancer unless they really do, in scientific studies, have been shown to cure cancer. But this government agency is in charge of this. Infrastructure. What is infrastructure? What are some examples of infrastructure? So bridges, roads, highways, these are all examples of infrastructure. They help businesses conduct business more efficiently. For example, this is a picture from 1925 of the Benjamin Franklin Bridge under construction. Prior to this, cars and people used to go across the Delaware River by ferry, which is fairly inefficient. Now, with the modern bridge, cars go across the bridge from New Jersey to Philadelphia quite quickly. So as a review, we don't truly have a completely free market in the United States. The government steps in to build infrastructure. It redistributes wealth. For example, it takes taxes in and gives out social services like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. It ensures property rights. And the agencies we talked about were the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the United States, which sets interest rates, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, which sets up rules to protect workers, the Food and Drug Administration, which makes sure that food is safe and drugs are safe and effective, and the FTC, which regulates advertising claims to make sure that they are true. That's it for page 462 in Kaplan.